The Committee on Equity Policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education.
The Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education will come to order. I note that a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to call recess at any time. Good morning. Academic excellence is the foundation of K-12 education. Every student deserves access to a great education, to the highest quality education possible. All students benefit when schools set high expectations and provide pathways to success. Policymakers and educators should focus on expanding access to rigorous academic opportunities. These are common sense principles, And yet, they are increasingly being abandoned in school districts across America. Instead of helping students overcome challenges and reach their full potential, too many schools are prioritizing uniform outcomes, or what is called equity, over student achievement. Such policies do a grave disservice to all students and particularly limit those from disadvantaged backgrounds. We can see this trend in three areas: gifted and talented education, equitable grading, and charter schools. Let's start with gifted and talented programs. These classes are overwhelmingly popular with parents. According to a 2024 EdChoice Morning Consult poll, 63% of parents said it was at least very important that their child's school offer advanced academic classes, while only 8% expressed that it was not important. There's also considerable evidence that gifted education is good for kids. As Johns Hopkins professor Jonathan Plucker summarized the research, acceleration is one of the most studied intervention strategies in all of education, with overwhelming evidence of positive effects on student achievement. Despite this, gifted education is under attack. In New York City, there are efforts to scale back the city's gifted and talented program. In California, San Francisco Unified actually spent a decade preventing advanced eighth graders from taking Algebra 1. Now, San Francisco eventually reversed course based on evidence that it actually harmed low-income and minority students, but not before California's Instructional Quality Commission urged schools throughout the state to eliminate K through 10 accelerated math. These policies are bad for everyone. They prevent high achievers from reaching their potential and make it more difficult for students of all achievement levels to receive the instruction that will lead them to success. Perhaps most perversely, these policies that are promoted in the name of equity actually deny students from less advantaged backgrounds the opportunities that will help them advance. And this has been validated by studies repeatedly. Academic research has shown that when you have objective identification standards in place for students eligible for advanced instruction, it actually triples the number of students from minority and low-income backgrounds that are enrolled in those programs. And the reason that perversely these sort of policies that are promoted in the name of equity actually widen achievement gaps is that our public school system is, of course, where students can get a education that's open to all, that doesn't cost anything. And so when you close off that pathway for access to advanced learning, then it's only those who have the means to seek out other pathways, such as tutoring, such as private schools, such as enrichment activities and extracurriculars, who have access to them. Another misguided policy is so-called equitable grading. Despite its laudable goals, in practice, this recent innovation often means that common sense practices, such as penalizing late work and failing students for cheating, are deemed problematic. Portland Public Schools offers a case study. Teachers were instructed in 2023 to discard traditional yardsticks of student performance, including homework assignments, attendance, and small evaluations like quizzes. It's hard to imagine a policy that could be more destructive to academic excellence, student motivation, and integrity than this. This false notion of equity in practice limits student growth and widens achievement gaps. Nowhere do we see this more clearly than in the opposition to charter schools, which are perhaps the greatest force for expanding educational opportunity in America today. Stanford's noted Credo studies have shown that urban charter students gain 40 additional days of learning in math. That is a remarkable result. There's virtually no other education reform with such a track record of success. Yet all too often, instead of trying to replicate these results for all students, political interests have attacked charter schools and their leaders, denied them equal funding, capped their expansion, and propagated myths in an attempt to deny the charter success story. Here are the ultimate stakes in this discussion today. By any measure, America is falling behind other nations when it comes to academic achievements in our schools. We see this in test results now. We also see it in terms of how many leading researchers our country is producing in key STEM areas as opposed to other countries. This is a grave threat to our future, and we must act with urgency to change the trajectory. That will involve many important reforms to make our schools work better for students, but above all, it requires a renewed commitment to excellence in American education. With that, I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. I'll start by saying that gifted and talented programs, advanced placement, AP, International Baccalaureate, IB, and dual enrollment courses, they do offer extended and expanded opportunities for students. But I'll also note that engaging rigorous coursework that expands critical thinking skills should be available to every student, regardless of the existence of special programs. It's one of the primary goals of ESSA's Title IV-A student support and academic enrichment provisions on well-rounded education. But as is the case with all curriculum decisions, the federal government's role is to provide funding and research, not to decide what is taught or how in what type of program. Decisions about curriculum and screening for these programs are made by states and local districts. Because of that, the selection process and makeup of programs like gifted and talented programs, they vary widely from district to district. That being said, one unfortunate reality does hold true regardless of locality. The students who benefit from the system are disproportionately white and wealthy. In many districts, access depends heavily on parent advocacy, early screening, prior placement decisions, teacher referrals, or simply whether a student attends a school that offers advanced coursework. As a result, access to advanced coursework options can vary sharply by race, by income, by English language ability, geography, and school type. Black and brown students are more likely to be denied access to those programs, and students with disabilities often lack access to rigorous coursework even when they have the potential to succeed academically with or without reasonable accommodation. I will note that it's an ongoing challenge to understand the majority's position in this committee. It seems that it's all about local control, unless and until it's something that the majority wants to have Congress decide. I also challenge the title of today's hearing, which is How Equity Policies Undermine Excellence and Harm Students. Let me be clear, equity and excellence do not conflict. Well-designed, evidence-based equity practices allow all students to reach their full potential without being hampered by bias, information gaps, or resource limitations. It is both cruel and factually inaccurate to argue that expanding access to gifted programs makes them less excellent. All students should have the opportunity to pursue their dreams and get the education that's best suited for them, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, or zip code. Students sitting side by side with peers who look or sound different from them doesn't diminish the learning experience. It improves learning for everyone. Widening the doorway to excellence is not the same as lowering the ceiling. What does harm students, however, is that schools and districts are struggling from a lack of resources, in part because of Republican policies, including a tax on public education. The Trump administration is illegally dismantling the Department of Education, causing chaos and confusion for districts, schools, and families. Secretary McMahon has frozen funding, delayed grant awards, and awarded waivers to states to use funding however they wish, weakening accountability measures put in place by Congress to guarantee the equitable distribution of funds. This administration has fundamentally harmed the ability of Congress to improve and strengthen our public school system. And as I have pointed out to this subcommittee and to the full committee ad nauseum, the federal government does not dictate curriculum, but it does, and it should, promote equity in education and close funding gaps, so all students have the opportunity to succeed. This has been the federal role in education since then President Lyndon Johnson signed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act into law in the 1960s. Importantly, researchers at the Institute of Education Sciences, IES, they conduct critical work to understand, for example, how gifted and talented programs can remain academically rigorous while accessible to students from diverse backgrounds. Unfortunately, the Trump administration's disastrous cuts to IES funding decimated their ability to continue studying these trends and guide states and districts to the best practices for gifted education. I hope my colleagues who care so much about this topic will join me in advocating to reinstate IES funding. Without long-term sustained federal investment, schools and educators will lack the tools, the resources, and importantly, the research they need to teach all students effectively. Instead of throwing taxpayer dollars at school voucher systems, we should be putting that money toward the public education system, which has been the backbone of this country for centuries, and where about 90% of all U.S. students attend school. Finally, a word about test scores, which I know several witnesses will discuss. Assessments are important, but the well-intentioned yet disastrous in implementation No Child Left Behind led to high-stakes testing that was used in a punitive way, which in turn led to narrowed curriculum, teaching to the test, and a distrust in standardized testing. What we need is high-quality assessments that are used by educators with assessment literacy to inform instruction, not to punish schools or students. And we should also stop comparing the U.S. and our test scores, which come from more than 12,000 very diverse school districts, with test scores of students in countries with universal health care, robust early childhood education, paid family leave, and in some cases, a lot less poverty, all of which matter to student success. So instead of demonizing public education, Congress should be uplifting it. We must give schools, districts, and the states the resources they need to succeed to fill the opportunity gaps. And of course, we must conduct oversight of states so all students have those opportunities and the skills they need to thrive. I look forward to today's conversation, and I yield back.
Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. 14 days after this hearing. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material noted during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I'll now introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Daniel Buck, Research Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute here in Washington, D.C. Our second witness is Ms. Wai Wah Chin, founding president of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance of Greater New York in New York City. Our third witness is Ms. Michaele Turnage, Young, senior counsel and co-manager of the Equal Protection Initiative at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund in Washington, D.C. And our fourth witness is Mr. Paul Runko, senior director of K-12 initiatives at Defending Education in Arlington, Virginia. We thank our witnesses for being here today and look forward to your testimony. Pursuant to committee rules, I would ask that you each limit your oral presentation to a 3-minute summary of your written statement. As committee members have many questions for you, the clock will count down from 3 minutes. However, pursuant to Committee Rule 8D and committee practice, we will not cut off your testimony until you reach the 5-minute mark. I'd also like to remind the witnesses to be aware of your responsibility to provide accurate information to the subcommittee. I'll first recognize Mr. Buck for your testimony.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Bonamici, and distinguished members of the committee. During my time as a Title I teacher in Title I schools, I watched as expectations for students only got lower and lower, all in the name of equity. Every standard to which we used to hold students, from memorizing basic math facts to writing a simple paragraph with proper grammar, was deconstructed by progressives. I watched as their policies ruined schools and codified into law the soft bigotry of low expectations. And I sit here today frustrated because those who champion equity advance the policies that make schools only worse for our students. The clearest and most recent example of this trend is Mayor Mamdani's promise to eliminate gifted and talented education in New York City, despite his own privileged educational journey from the Bank Street School for Children, with an annual tuition over $60,000, to the elite Bronx High School of Science. Likewise, in 2014, San Francisco removed the option for 8th graders to take algebra, which resulted only in fewer students taking advanced classes overall and larger achievement gaps on standardized tests. Removing gifted programs doesn't solve inequities. Instead, it closes off often the only route that underprivileged students have to advanced learning and the career pathways that come from it. At the school and district level, equity grading. These are policies of lenient grading scales, no zeros grading, no homework, unlimited retakes, no late work penalties. This equity grading is yet another policy pushed by progressives that accomplishes lower standards and depressed achievement. Large majorities of teachers oppose it, and several studies have confirmed that students learn more and achieve more when they face tougher grading. If you allow students to turn in shoddy work, late work, or no work at all, then that is precisely what they will do. Conversely, if you set high standards, hold students to them, they will reach them, and they will be grateful for it in the long run. Many prominent Democrats have also opposed charter schools, despite the fact, as you alluded to, Mr. Chairman, that attendance at urban charter schools results in the equivalent of 40 additional days of learning per year in math and 28 additional days of learning per year in reading. Expanding access to charter schools is arguably the single most promising policy to close the achievement gap, and yet Democrats oppose them regardless. In every case, progressives have implemented a regime of equity in which everyone gets nothing. And in every case, the policy solution is simple: keep standards high. I've had a front row seat in schools for the last decade, watching as progressives have waged damaging wars against merit, all in the name of equity. I want to thank this committee for the opportunity to speak, and I implore you all to reject equity policies and instead adopt an excellence agenda focused on high standards, merit, and academic rigor. Thank you again.
Thanks very much. I'll next recognize Ms. Chin for your testimony.
Distinguished Chairman, Ranking Member, and Subcommittee members, thank you for the opportunity to testify. A friend, a school parent who's volunteered countless hours to starting a new school in New York City called Next Gen Technologies High School, and also worked closely with a principal, found a space, and got 1,000 applicants to this new school. 2/3 of them, Black and Hispanic, the applicants. Yesterday, it was announced by the chairman of the board, what we call the education policy panel, said that for equity purposes, we will stop and end Next Gen. Next generation technologies was supposed to address AI, computer science, technology issues for kids of any race, any economic background. This was killed. What is equity, which stops our next generations? What matters to our next generations? Merit matters. Merit matters every time you board a plane, you turn on your phone, you do an internet search. When you're on the operating table, you don't want a surgeon chosen by equity. You want one chosen by merit. We need high, objective standards in our schools at every level, especially in STEM. American innovation, prosperity, and national security rely on our top world-class STEM talent. And how are we doing? The US spends among the most per student in the world, yet our outcomes lag top performing countries, and we don't produce the high skilled workforce that we need. By 8th grade, American students trail top performing countries in math roughly 3 to 4 years. They don't catch up either. By age 15, they're still 3 to 4 years behind. These are based on TIMSS and PISA scores, assessments that are very objective. By our nation's own report card, only 22% of our 12th graders, and these are the ones who are still in school, are math proficient, and math proficiency is a very low standard. These aren't small gaps. This is system-wide failure. And what are we doing? With districts reducing rigorous academics in favor of non-academic frameworks like social-emotional learning, culturally responsive pedagogy, and equity initiatives that take time from core academics and inject social or political agendas into the classrooms. Merit-based programs like Gifted and Talented and Accelerated Tracks, which have long helped advanced students learn at the right pace, are being, as in New York, we've mentioned it several places here already, reduced or diluted due to equity. Selective public high schools that historically produced top STEM talent face challenges they are also being attacked. Nationally, top-rated schools like Virginia's Thomas Jefferson, Boston Latin, and New York specialized high schools, Stuyvesant, Bronx Science, have relied on objective merit-based exam admissions. Recent changes for equity, though, have lowered standards, reduced advanced coursework, discriminated against Asian Americans, and weakened academic results. This is the wrong direction. We've already lost our global lead in STEM, from AI to semiconductors to quantum computing. Lowering standards and abandoning merit only widens gaps. Instead, we should expand high-quality, merit-based schools and programs, strengthen objective academic measures, and support accelerated education. New York specialized high schools show what merit can do. These are poor kids, in most cases, in these schools. Their graduates include 15 Nobel laureates. That's more than what most countries in the world have, and include generations of innovators whose work benefit all humanity. When we abandon merit, we harm our shared future. For America's future, we must recommit to excellence, rigor, and merit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll next recognize Ms. Turnage Turnage Young for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Michaele, Ranking Member Bonamici, and other distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Michelle Turnage Young. I serve as Senior Counsel and Co-Manager of the Equal Protection Initiative at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, or LDF for short. Founded by our nation's first Black Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall, LDF is America's premier law organization fighting for racial justice. As a nation, we cannot afford to forego the benefits of the talents of any of our children. Our national security, our ability to compete in a global economy with scientific and technological innovation, and the health of our democracy depend on producing leaders, workers, and a well-educated, civically engaged citizenry capable of navigating and thriving in our increasingly racially diverse society. Given this, every child should have equal access to a quality public education, regardless of their income, where they are growing up, or their racial and ethnic background. Yet this administration has attacked policies that are both legal and necessary to ensure that all students are afforded equal educational opportunities. In particular, this administration has attacked efforts to remedy the vestiges of de jure segregation, instruction about systemic racism, programming, training, and affinity groups that support students, and efforts to remove obstacles that unfairly deny students a fair chance to compete for admission to selective programs. There is no basis for the federal government's narrative that equity policies or diversity, equity, and inclusion are somehow incompatible with the pursuit of excellence and high standards. Rather, by supporting students and ensuring that measures of merit are actually objective, these policies heighten standards and promote excellence. Rooted in decades of efforts to achieve equality for all, well-designed diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility programs are not only legal, but they have helped open doors for millions of Americans by addressing discrimination and ensuring that everyone, regardless of race, gender, sexual identity, religion, creed, disability status, national origin, and more, has equal access to opportunity. For example, universal screening for gifted and talented programs has been attacked as an equity policy. However, one study showed that merely giving every child a chance to take the IQ test, instead of only screening those referred by teachers, resulted in a 180% increase in the share of disadvantaged students who were identified as gifted, including many Black and Hispanic students, low-income students, English language learners, and girls. Rather than attacking lawful efforts to advance equal educational opportunity, LDF urges Congress to work to take these 5 steps towards ensuring that all students have a fair shot at getting a high-quality public education. First, Congress must use its authority to immediately halt all efforts by the current administration to unlawfully dismantle the U.S. Department of Education. Second, Congress should increase Title I funding, incentivize state and local educational agencies to implement evidence-based policies that support students, and expand grant programs that advance school desegregation, like the Equity Assistance Center program and the Magnet School Assistance Program. The Magnet School Assistance Program provides critical funding to support the development and operation of magnet schools that bring together students of different racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds, while the Equity Assistance Center provides support to schools in complying with our federal anti-discrimination laws. Third, Congress should repeal the federal private school voucher program and reinvest in public education that serves all students. Fourth, Congress should help create the conditions necessary to welcoming professionals from all walks of life into the ranks of the nation's cadre of teachers. Fifth, Congress should work to ensure that the U.S. Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Justice, and other federal agencies are fulfilling their mandate to enforce anti-discrimination laws. That means that rather than abandoning some school desegregation cases and ending others, the United States Department of Justice should fulfill its obligation to ensure that school districts that previously engaged in de jure segregation cure their long-standing constitutional violations by eliminating the vestiges of de jure segregation to the extent possible so that students can enjoy an equal opportunity to get an education. That also means that the Department of Education, other federal agencies should cease their attempts to end instruction on systemic racism, programming, training, and affinity groups that support students, and efforts to remove obstacles that unfairly deny students a fair chance to compete for admission to selective programs. In sum, talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. In order to achieve excellence that leverages the full universe of talent in this country, Congress must work to eliminate entrenched barriers to equal opportunity that can unfairly disadvantage many hardworking, talented students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And lastly, I'll recognize Mr. Runko for your testimony.
Chairman Michaele, Ranking Member Bonamici, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me. My name is Paul Runko, and I'm the Senior Director of K-12 Initiatives at Defending Education. A growing number of American public schools are minimizing or eliminating merit-based opportunities in the name of so-called equity initiatives. These policies reduce academic rigor, complicate the measurement of student performance, and ultimately leave all students worse off, including those they are meant to help. First, gifted education and advanced learning opportunities are increasingly being throttled. Across the country, school systems have reduced or eliminated gifted and talented programs and access to advanced coursework. In theory, this would level the playing field. In practice, it slows the progress of high-achieving students while failing to meaningfully support those who are academically struggling. The real-world ramifications of limiting merit-based opportunities are clear. In San Francisco, the district eliminated Algebra 1 in middle school for over a decade, arguing that it would improve equity. It did not. Only recently has the district restored algebra as an option at all middle schools after a test period showed that students with access to algebra made dramatic academic gains. Second, grading practices are being altered in ways that can obscure student learning. So-called equitable grading policies have been implemented in school districts. These approaches remove accountability measures such as penalties for late work, attendance, or even cheating. In some cases, they establish grade floors, giving students a minimum grade regardless of performance. While these changes may increase reported grades, they do not necessarily indicate increased learning. More importantly, these policies risk sending the message to students that effort and mastery are optional. But accurate grading is not punitive, it is essential. Students and families deserve clear, honest feedback about academic progress so that gaps can be addressed. Third, we are seeing a broader cultural shift away from recognizing and celebrating academic excellence. In some districts, traditional forms of academic recognition have been scaled back or eliminated. Examples include eliminating the honor of valedictorian, discontinuing honor rolls and class rankings, and not designating honors classes on official school transcripts. These decisions reflect a view that celebrating excellence is harmful to the success of struggling learners. But intentionally not recognize achievement does nothing to address gaps in student performance. It simply makes them harder to identify and address. In conclusion, merit-based education is not about giving opportunities to some students over others. It is about ensuring that every student is challenged, evaluated honestly, and allowed to reach their full potential. We have a responsibility to help all students become the best versions of themselves, expanding access to gifted and talented programs, maintaining high standards in grading, and recognizing achievement are not barriers to bridging academic gaps. They are essential to addressing them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Under Committee Rule 9, we will now question witnesses under the 5-minute rule, and I will first recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Wahlberg of Michigan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for having this hearing. It's increasingly, at least visible to me as I watch and then hear what's being said, that there is a whole industry that speaks to victimization and wants that continuation because it proffers them the ability to have organizations and funding that they wouldn't get otherwise. And it's hurting kids. And it's hurting our future. And to prop up the U.S. Department of Education when they cannot show one success since 1980 and $3 trillion spent, and our scores are going down and we're falling behind other world countries. So I'm glad you had this hearing today. Gifted, talented, expansive education opportunities seem just to be common sense. I won't take time to define that right now. But thank you for the panel for being here. Mr. Buck, one common critique we hear of gifted education is that it's bad for minority students. I have 3 minority granddaughter students who, if they don't have gifted opportunities, they will be wasted in their academic excellence opportunity. That's not just saying because I'm their grandfather. I watch them. I see what they can do. In reality, I think that gifted programs are a vital lifeline for marginalized students to get education they need. Do you agree with me, and why?
Thank you for your question, and yes, absolutely, I agree with you. I worked in the highest crime zip code in Milwaukee, and there I taught some of the most gifted students that I ever had the pleasure to teach. When it came to their standardized test scores, they blew out of the water students that were from the other side of the tracks. And it's essential that they have access to gifted and talented programs, because without the resources that come with affluence, the leisure time from coming from a 2-parent household, often the only chance they have at gifted and talented programming, any kind of advanced coursework, is through schools. They cannot afford additional tutoring. They cannot afford, all of these supplemental educational opportunities. So gifted and talented programs are their chance to get those. And the research finds that students from impoverished backgrounds, gifted and talented programs disproportionately benefit them for this reason, without spillover negative effects for anybody else in the school.
Yeah, they're going to get gifted and talented programs, just depends what those are. And we want the positives with the education opportunity. Thank you. Ms. Chin, thanks for the work you do in charter education. Another argument we hear sometimes is that wealthy students benefit the most from gifted programs, and that disadvantaged students are rarely accepted to these programs. Why do you think gifted programs are essential to low-income families?
I would say, on the contrary, that the disadvantaged are not doing well on this. If anything, I agree with you that we have to continue these programs because they help the disadvantaged. Without that, the wealthier people can probably find their ways, okay? They know where to go and get the tutoring, have the educational opportunities, but I think that we have to have gifted and talented programs larger, faster, more widespread to every corner of this country. And that's the way we're going to be able to reach all of the students. They benefit.
That's true equal opportunity, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Runko, you mentioned that parents, surprise, surprise, parents overwhelmingly want more education opportunities and options for their kids in high quality programs. And I think most parents want the best education opportunities for their kids. Why do we know, what do we know about how much parents want these programs when Democrat politicians constantly seem intent on cutting off these options?
There's two things that come to mind when you pose this question. The first is there was a poll done last year by a group called Place NYC, a great parent group out of New York City, after Mayor Mamdani had said that he wanted to get rid of gifted and talented in kindergarten. And their poll showed that nearly half of those parents surveyed would not enroll their children in New York City public schools if the gifted and talented program was eliminated. So that's a fair chunk of parents. Also, when San Francisco Unified had reintroduced algebra into middle school, the school board president had said at the time, quote, "Families want to see a public school system that offers rigorous coursework."
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, and I yield back.
The ranking member, Representative Bonamici of Oregon, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses. Interesting conversation. And certainly with gifted and talented programs, they're designed to help students meet their full potential. Every student should have an opportunity to meet their full potential. And Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to ask a question. Ms. Turnage Young, excuse me. In Oregon, more than half the state is federally owned land. So many rural schools have faced years of budget instability, staffing shortages, and aging infrastructure, making consistent federal support through the bipartisan Secure Rural Schools legislation essential to meeting baseline educational needs. These communities, like many rural areas, depend on federal investment to provide students with stable and high-quality educational opportunities. So from your perspective, as a civil rights litigator, is sustained support for rural schools an equity-based initiative? And how does providing rural communities with the resources they need, how does it contribute to meeting the educational needs of their students and advancing equal opportunities nationwide?
Thank you for that question. LDF has the honor of representing many students who attend rural school districts. And so we're familiar with a dynamic where the school district itself might not have the most robust property tax base. And because of that, they might have less funding to fund teacher salaries and the salaries of school mental health professionals and others who are supporting our students. The Securing Rural Schools program is essentially closing that funding gap for many of our schools across the country. That is absolutely a program that is just as much an equity program as many of the different initiatives that have been attacked for being equity programs recently. I would say that educational institutions, workplaces, healthcare systems, the military, and more have used programs that have been attacked as equity programs to develop programs and policies that are rooted in fairness and are responsive to everyone's needs. These are programs that are helping to ensure that all of us, regardless of where we live, who one is, what social or economic barriers one faces, can receive fair treatment and have fair access to the resources necessary to actually have equal access to opportunities.
Thank you. I want to get to another question. I appreciate that. In 2017, the United States Supreme Court ruled that school districts must provide individualized education programs, or IEPs, that are appropriately ambitious and reasonably calculated to foster academic progress for students with disabilities. And although these decisions are made at the local level, the Department of Education does play a critical role in providing guidance, technical assistance, and oversight to see that school districts are meeting this obligation to disabled students. So again, Ms. Turnage Young, Congress charged the Department of Education with implementing IDEA. Are you concerned that this administration will shift responsibility for IDEA out of what's left of the Department of Education, as they've done with other programs? And what would such a shift of responsibility mean for students with disabilities?
Yes, LDF is concerned about the moving of many of the responsibilities of the U.S. Department of Education out of that department. That department has long handled those matters. They've developed expertise and institutional memory concerning how to best serve students in that way. And so by introducing these changes, we risk not serving students as well. Notably, in fiscal year 2024 alone, OCR, or the Office for Civil Rights of the U.S. Department of Education, received nearly 23,000 complaints overall, and 37% of those were actually alleged disability discrimination. Unfortunately, from what we know of the way that office is currently operating, those complaints are not being attended to, which of course denies our students an equal opportunity to get an education.
Appreciate that. I have another question. Again, Ms. Turnage Young, we've heard some comparisons this morning of United States students' test scores. United States has thousands of different school districts, different school boards across many states, obviously. Would students do better in school if we had what these other countries have? Many of them, they have a national system, but they also have universal health care. Parents have paid leave. Early childhood education and childcare is accessible and affordable, and that makes a big difference in how kids start in school and in life. So would these comparisons make sense, to compare the thousands of school districts across the country with countries that have universal health care and low poverty rates?
No, that comparison is not apt because, as you pointed out, many of those factors absolutely do affect your ability to excel in school. If we want our children to excel, we need to make sure that they have the cognitive space to actually focus on learning. We don't want them to be worried about, am I safe? Do I have a place to eat? Am I going to be subject to racial discrimination? And so all of the programs that we have to ensure that our students are receiving the supports that they need, and also anything that we can do to make sure that those families are receiving the support that they need to create those conditions that are kind of
My time has expired. I yield back.
I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I first want to address the point that was just raised. This idea that we can't expect students in this country to achieve at the same levels as other countries because of things like healthcare access and poverty rates. I just want to say that nothing could be more contrary to the principles of this committee. We believe that every child deserves access to a great education. We believe that students of all backgrounds have the capacity to succeed, and we reject the systematic lowering of expectations that has condemned far too many kids in this country to a subpar education. What equity really ought to mean is not lowering expectations for everyone. What it should mean is giving every child the access to an education that students at Success Academy have, for example, in New York, a school that has much higher poverty rates than surrounding school districts, but that actually is the top performing charter network or school district in the entire state of New York, out of hundreds of districts. That's what equity truly means. And secondly, I reject the notion that the United States should just settle for not having the best schools anywhere in the world, or that we can't have that until we solve other problems. I believe that U.S. schools should be the best that exist anywhere. I think it's a travesty that is not the case now, but I think that we can change that if we return to educational excellence and high expectations as our guiding principles. A question for Ms. Chin. Thank you very much for your testimony. As we've discussed, in my state, California, we've seen some of the worst of these policies. For example, in San Francisco, they said no one gets access to 8th grade algebra. The point was raised that everyone should have access to these sort of programs. Well, in San Francisco, they said no one should have access to them. And now we see this playing out in, for example, UC San Diego, which is a very good school, has seen the rate of number of students who require remedial math. We can't even do middle school math, grow to 1 out of every 8 students. So could you tell us a little bit more about sort of the downstream consequences of these sort of policies?
I agree with you completely here. This is defining merit downwards. Once you say that you're going to use equity to make access, what will happen is that you have to lower the standards for everybody. And that impacts everybody in this room, okay? It's not just those students who get in who should not be able to do that. That means that you will not provide all of these skills, these resources and subjects that should be covered very early. That hurts everybody, not just those students who can't take it, but the students who should be taking it and all of us who should be benefiting from it.
That's right. Ms. Turnage, thank you as well for your testimony. In California, they've attacked high-performing charter schools again and again. And when I was in the legislature, during one of these rounds of attacks, they tried to limit the number of charters. Several local chapters of the NAACP actually opposed what these proposals were trying to do and came out in support of charters. So would you agree that attacks on high-performing charter networks like KIP or Success Academy work against the interests of equity?
What's really important from our standpoint is ensuring that all students have equal access to a high-quality education.
But the question about attacks on high-performing charters working against the interests of equity, would you agree?
LDF doesn't have a position on charter schools, but we do have a position on making sure that all students, to the extent that charter schools are going to be provided, we want to make sure that all students have equal access to them. And certainly we want to make sure that we're not divesting from traditional public schools in the process, since 90% of our students attend school there.
Thank you. Mr. Buck, we've seen that actually, some of these policies have started to be pulled back. In San Francisco, for example, they overwhelmingly rejected after a decade of this failed experiment denying 8th grade math. In many colleges that stopped using standardized tests, they've now reinstituted the standardized test. So do you think that maybe the pendulum is starting to swing back towards sanity here and there's an opportunity to return to a paradigm of excellence?
I certainly hope that the pendulum is swinging back to a place of sanity. I think a lot of people were tricked up by kind of nice sounding rhetoric about equity, but they're starting to see the consequences of these policies. You can say what what you're actually trying to do, we're going to advance equity, but when the results are, as you said, just more students taking remedial math in college, standardized test scores going down, achievement gaps widening, it doesn't really matter what your rhetoric is when those are the results in reality.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Representative Adams for 5 minutes. Or sorry, Representative Lee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to start by making sure that we're all on the same page, because I hear a lot about what equity is or isn't. So if each witness could just answer the following questions with just a yes or no. The first one, is the Individuals with Disability Education Act an equity policy, Mr. Runko?
No.
Ms. Turnage Young?
Yes.
Ms. Chin?
No.
Mr. Buck?
Nope.
How about Title IX? Is that an equity policy? Same order.
No.
Yes.
No.
Nope.
Is the ruling from Brown versus Board of Education to desegregate schools an equity policy?
No.
Yes.
No.
No.
So thank you so much for that. Republicans holding a hearing titled How Equity Policies Harm Students, and witnesses, I don't know if you all will be able to identify what an actual equity policy is, but it lets us know exactly where they stand. You either believe that every child in this country deserves access to education, or you don't. But the idea that it's harmful to give people a level playing field within systems that were directly created to disadvantage them isn't just absurd, it is perpetuating the very racist systems that conservatives pretend never existed in the first place. Our country doesn't just have an explicit, KKK racism problem. We have institutionalized systemic racism. We need equity policies because we have disparities and gaps that were created by policy decisions. Black children were not denied access to schools because they lacked intelligence or merit. They were denied because they were Black. And there were systems created around that continued to bolster that segregation, redlining, urban renewal, the GI Bill. These are all government policies implemented to advantage one community to the disadvantage of another. The government then bears responsibility for remedying the harm that it created. That's what equity is. So instead of saying that we're lowering expectations by saying that, hey, if a child is hungry, they probably won't perform well. If a child has unstable housing, that they might not perform well. If a child can't access a doctor, they might not perform well. That's not lowering expectations. That's raising the expectations for a government that is the wealthiest in the world, and assuming that it can and should do better for all of its citizens. So I just want to say the Department of Education is using its increasingly limited capacity to issue guidance that would revoke federal funding from schools over equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. Ms. Turnage Young, the LDF sued the department over the guidance, this guidance on behalf of the NAACP. What was the outcome of that lawsuit?
We prevailed.
And despite, so to be clear, it was vacated. It was unconstitutionally vague, right? Despite this important win, is conservatives' crusade against equity still harming students?
It is. Unfortunately, the threat to revoke federal funding has a vast chilling effect on educators and school leaders across the country. So school leaders would like to hire additional teachers to serve their students, but they don't know whether the funding is going to disappear or vanish, and they're going to have to lay off that person 2 weeks later. The uncertainty has been a real problem. The Dear Colleague letter, for example, came out in February of 2025. That's Black History Month. Many Black History Month programs were canceled. Reading programs were canceled. Talks by physicians were canceled, ostensibly because the physician was Black. Coursework in various areas was canceled. And unfortunately, not all of those policies and practices have been reinstated. And so unfortunately, our students are missing out.
Thank you. I just want to say that they're using the same playbook that they've used for decades. They're dismantling the Department of Ed, using the same states' rights argument used by the massive resistance to desegregation. Very quickly in your testimony, you talked about how far we are still from realizing the promise of Brown and how this administration is actively moving away. What are the most important steps we can take to ensure that Black, Brown, and other marginalized students have equitable access to education in this country?
So first of all, equity and excellence go hand in hand, right? So desegregating our schools actually led to opportunity gaps closing in such a way where we saw students achieving excellence, and we've retreated from that. So there are many things that Congress can do, right? Congress can invest in programs that incentivize desegregation. They can invest in the Magnet School Assistance Program. They can invest in the Equity Assistance Centers Program. And they can use their influence to ensure that our federal agencies are doing what they can to ensure that school districts are curing those constitutional violations and remedying the vestiges of de jure segregation to the extent possible so all of our students can enjoy an equal opportunity to get an education.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Representative Rulli of Ohio is recognized.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Runko, equitable grading policies create wasted potential. When expectations are lowered in the name of fairness, all students realize that excellence is no longer required in schools. We already see this effect of these ideas with absurd policies like that are happening right now in Georgia Tech. Their grading guidelines say that even cheating should not affect a student's letter grade. Meanwhile, in Ohio, we take the opposite approach. Our state law requires that public school districts implement a student acceleration policy for advanced learners, not take these away from them. So, Mr. Runko, I guess the question at hand is a two-part question. With everything we saying today in mind, are we wasting potential with these equitable grading policies? And also, are we setting all our students, not just some of them, all of them up for failure in the future?
Thank you for the question. What we've heard from parents on this issue is that equitable grading practices are lowering standards across the board. So I'll give you a couple of examples. If a student gets to retake a test, maybe once, twice, for equitable purposes, why would a student study for the test for the first time? If a high-achieving student doesn't have to go to class or they don't have to hand in their homework, but they could just ace the test at the end of the course, why wouldn't they just do that? And so these are the concerns our parents have, and not setting good habits in school is not going to set them up for success in life.
Don't you think that the challenges of academics and the different projects that you have and trying to beat your other classmates will elevate all boats of every kind of imagination?
That's exactly right. And there's a lot of argument that gifted and talented programs, advanced coursework, have some adverse effects of other students. That's completely untrue. And to your point, in some instances, you would expect that these students, the lower performing students, would actually benefit from these because the teaching can be geared towards their academic abilities.
Well, thank you for your time. With that, I yield my time back to the chair.
Representative Adams is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the witnesses for being here. Ms. Turnage, when we talk about equity today, some try to frame it as something new or controversial. But the truth is, this country has always had identity-based policies, just not always ones that expanded opportunity. Before Brown versus the Board of Education, we had laws and systems that deliberately separated students, underfunded schools, and limited access based on race, income, and zip code. And while Brown made it clear that separate is not equal, we know that more than 70 years later, We're still dealing with the consequences of those decisions. We see it in how schools are funded. We see it in access to experienced teachers. We see it in which students are more likely to have advanced coursework and which students are left out. Ms. Turnage-Young, from your work as a civil rights attorney, can you briefly help us understand how equity-focused policies today are part of fulfilling the promise of Brown?
Absolutely. So I'll talk a little bit about the work that our equity assistance centers do. These are centers that were funded in order to help our schools desegregate, in order to help our schools comply with federal anti-discrimination laws. As I'm sure all of you know, the racially discriminatory administration of discipline is negatively correlated with student achievement, right? And so, you know, if you take a child out of that instructional space, they're not getting their lesson. That is not positively correlated with academic success. So those equity assistance centers have actually worked with schools to ensure that their disciplinary policies are being enforced consistently, to ensure that it's not being enforced arbitrarily, and to ensure that they are not removing students from classrooms unnecessarily. And that actually is something that has yielded results. We've seen schools that have had their discipline rates greatly improve, and those students are better able to take in those lessons and achieve.
Okay, I want to move on. So we can't talk about academic achievement without talking about what students are carrying with them into the classroom. Right now, we're facing a real mental health crisis among young people. Students are dealing with stress, anxiety, and pressure from every direction: academics, social expectations, family responsibilities. And we know this matters because when a student's struggling emotionally, it directly impacts their ability to focus, to learn, and to stay engaged in school. And research shows that mental health is not separate from academic success. It is foundational to it. That's why Congress took action through the bipartisan Safer Communities Act to invest in school-based mental health supports, because we understand that schools are often the first place students can access help. But at the same time, we've seen actions from this administration that have created instability, cuts to Medicaid that schools rely on for services, and the sudden cancellation of mental health grants that schools were depending on only to reverse course after public pressure. And that kind of uncertainty does not just affect systems, it affects students in real time. So, Ms. Turnage-Young, can you speak briefly to the role that federal investments play in supporting student mental health in schools, and what happens to students, especially those in underserved communities, when those supports are weakened, delayed, or taken away altogether?
Thank you for that question. What comes to mind for me is actually a rural school district that hired several school mental health providers in the wake of federal funding, allowing for those positions to be filled. And unfortunately, relatively recently, that funding was cut, and so they had to let those professionals go. The school administrators there talked about how important it was that the students had access to those resources, and the students, you know, were able to become more available to academic learning because some of the other concerns in their lives were being addressed, right? The students were able to work through some things and be available to, you know, excel in math, English, all of the things.
So let me ask you, based on your work and the research in this space, how should we be thinking about the real barriers to academic excellence in this country? And what does it look like to expand opportunity in a way that maintains rigor but ensures that talent and potential, not background, determine who gets access to it? Got 4 seconds.
Absolutely, it means funding initiatives that can support our students.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Representative Harris of North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of the witnesses for your testimony. I've certainly enjoyed reading the testimonies and apologize for being in and out between committee hearings this morning. The goal of our education system should be to provide students with a well-rounded education that focuses on core academic subjects, helps them develop their talents, and prepares them for the future. I've had the privilege of holding a front row seat watching my wife and daughter, both teachers who have tirelessly worked each year, day in and day out, to help students succeed. Unfortunately, across the country, we've seen programs that were created to help students succeed be reduced or even completely eliminated. An example of one of these programs is the Gifted and Talented program that provides students that need an additional academic challenge with advanced coursework geared toward keeping them engaged in school and helping them grow academically. Despite several studies showing the positive benefits of accelerated programs, including one study that examined about 100 years of research on acceleration's impact on K through 12 academic achievement, and found that acceleration appeared to have a positive, moderate, and statistically significant impact on students' academic achievement. There are critics, however, that argue the opposite of these findings. Mr. Runko, you mentioned that gifted programs work well for students who are admitted, but many critics think that gifted programs make everyone else worse off. What would you say to those concerns? Does the existence of gifted programs hurt low-performing students?
To my knowledge, there's no evidence that supports that academic programs for high learners had adverse effects on other learners. As I mentioned earlier, in some cases it might benefit low-performing students because the instruction can be tailored then to their academic ability.
Well, when you look at gifted education, it becomes increasingly apparent that while over 37 states set aside education funding for programming for gifted and talented students, including North Carolina, from which I come, the implementation of this funding and how it is used has varied quite significantly. In fact, a 2019 survey of over 2,000 schools found that most gifted and talented programs focus on activities, projects, and games rather than advanced instruction. Mr. Buck, I want to come to you. I've long believed in the importance of gifted education, and every single student should have the opportunity for the best education possible. At the same time, I'm sure we can all agree that there are ways that gifted programs can be implemented more effectively so they work better for students. What advice, Mr. Buck, would you give to a state and local leader who wants to make sure their gifted program uphold academic excellence and are open to all students with the necessary academic skills?
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about some positive policies. I think there are three things to keep in mind. The first one is to expand opportunities. If we think not enough students are getting into these programs, the best course isn't just to shut them all down, but to expand the opportunity to the number of seats so more students can have access to them, improve screening, to make sure we are getting an accurate measure of what students know and don't know and who should be in them. And then the third one is to make these programs as robust as possible. Like you said, most schools, it's just an additional activity, some set aside time, maybe a challenge problem that they go home with at the end of the night, instead of separate coursework, accelerated classes, something a little more robust that really challenges these students in a meaningful way.
Thank you, sir. Another practice that's entered education is equitable grading, we've talked about. Instead of assigning grades based on the completion and quality of a student's work, equitable grading demands that grading be oriented towards eliminating bias and promoting equity in society. What many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle argue is equitable grading practices are required to eliminate historical racial discrimination. But despite what many say it was set out to do, equitable grading has lowered the standards. Mr. Buck, you mentioned that many schools have adopted equitable grading policies. The theory seems to be that teachers shouldn't give students zeros for work they never did, allow unlimited test retakes in the name of equity. That strikes me as absurd. If anything, lowered expectations is the worst thing we could do for marginalized students. Do you think giving students credit for work they never did is the best way to fight racism, Mr. Buck?
No, I do not. In fact, it seems a particularly perverse way to try and fight racism, that is to not expect minority students to meet basically any standard. Again, policy result from that is obviously just to raise standards back up, to hold everyone to high expectations.
Thank you, sir. And thank you to the witnesses. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Representative Grijalva of Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. Today, we're here to discuss academic excellence, but we cannot have a serious conversation about excellence while ignoring the systemic funding disparities that force students in my district and all across the country to make do with less. The narrative that equity levels down standards is not only unsupported by research, but it actively harms millions of students, particularly those in Brown, Black, rural, and Indigenous communities who rely on federal civil rights protections to ensure that their zip code does not determine their destiny. If we continue to gut the Department of Education and roll back the lifelines designed to protect students, we aren't cutting red tape. We are cutting the potential of our next generation. Ms. Turnage-Young, I'd like to start with you on this point. Proposals to dismantle or significantly scale back the Department of Education raise serious concerns about how states and districts, especially those already under-resourced, would maintain civil rights protections, stable funding, and academic standards. We are already seeing early disruption when federal education functions are shifted. For example, in oversight of adult education under WIOA Title II begins to move from the Department of Education to the Department of Labor. States are facing confusing and gaps in coordination. More than 60 million adults nationwide lack basic literacy skills from populations often left behind by traditional systems. What harm do you see for students and adult learners for long-term educational quality, equity, and economic mobility if the department continues to be gutted?
If we're offloading functions that are the responsibility of the U.S. Department of Education onto other federal agencies that don't have the staffing, the resources, the expertise, the institutional memory to really excel in that task, our citizens are going to be harmed. Our learners are going to be harmed, and that's not something that we should be doing.
Right. Staffing reductions and delays at the department's Office of Federal Student Aid are already slowing program approvals and leaving institutions without clear guidance. Colleges are being asked to implement major policy changes while taking on greater compliance risk. They also face new accountability measures tied to outcomes that may not reflect transfer and access-focused programs, potentially limiting access for underrepresented students. Ms. Turnage-Young, how do you see these changes affecting student access and ability of community colleges or universities to serve them effectively?
Thank you for that question. Unfortunately, many of our colleges and universities don't have the luxury of having outside counsel or even sometimes inside counsel. And so when you do have the federal government advancing certain directives that might not be altogether clear, what we're experiencing is a real chilling effect. Educators not really knowing which way can I go that's not going to subject my educational institution to liability that could shut us down. And so instead of having programs that benefit our students, sometimes those programs are getting canceled because it's just unclear whether those programs would open the schools up to liability.
Mm-hmm. And some of the things that I've heard, some rhetoric today, culturally responsive pedagogy is critical, I think, in ensuring that teachers and students are able to access curriculum that is relevant. Universal screenings. And when I was on a school board for 20 years, we started instituting those, and your data totally checks out on the local level. We saw a tremendous increase in students from underrepresented groups that were accessing these kinds of classes. And magnet schools are also critical in my district. So when we talk about some of the things that I've heard on the other side, and some of your colleagues there on the witness, panel, saying that, this is victimization, this sort of policy, and that it's not victimization. These programs are advocacy and access to fight for educational outcomes. That's what's baffling to me is some of the statements that I hear where, this insinuates that project-based learning is not effective. It is, and it makes a difference for every student. All three of my children are in public schools, and all have had the opportunity to access these programs because of these types of screenings. And finally, Ms. Turnage-Young, staffing reductions affect key offices within the Department of Education, and there are growing concerns about federal government's ability to consistently enforce civil rights protections. What happens when that enforcement capacity is weakened?
Our families cannot look to the federal government for assistance with civil rights violations, and sometimes there is nowhere to go.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. I yield back.
Representative Messner of Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for our witnesses for being here today. Ms. Chin, in your written testimony, you mentioned the increased demand for the developed STEM workforce and the importance of a STEM K-12 pipeline for American innovation. As an engineer myself, I understand how important it is to start developing these building blocks early in a child's education through rigorous math and science curricula. Can you explain how the underdeveloped STEM workforce will directly impact America as a global leader in innovation?
If we don't have the kinds of students now learning the skills that need years to build, we will not have the workforce that can be in any of the technological fields that keep us at the leading edge of innovation. And if we don't have that, there's not much that we can do. We can become a grain producer, we can become a resource provider, but that is not what keeps countries and civilizations growing and strong.
Thank you. How do you expect the U.S. national security to be affected if we can't keep up with our adversaries overseas?
That will be an great danger very early, because if you don't have the people here to be able to do it, you have to have either outsourced. Are we going to outsource all of our tech to India? Are we going to rely on China to give us the kind of technology that we need? Those are mistakes for this country. We have to develop them internally.
Thank you. Mr. Buck, you mentioned in your testimony how competition from charter schools actually challenges local public schools to improve their performance. Indiana is no stranger to school choice and strong charter programs. In fact, according to the U.S. News, in my district is home to the number 2 ranked public high school in the nation, Signature School, which is a charter school. Mr. Buck, can you explain on how having competitive schools such as charters improves the entire public education system?
Yes, so I mentioned a large and ever-growing body of research literature that's called competitive effects, which is essentially that the presence of a charter school makes all of the other surrounding traditional public schools, the students there perform better as well. Why is that? 2 reasons. One, the charter school stands out as kind of an exemplar. They can try new practices, and then traditional public schools can follow along, see what succeeds and what fails, and replicate what works. And the other thing is simply competition. They don't have a guarantee of that bottom line, so they have to up their game to do better, and the students in the traditional public schools benefit from that competition.
Thank you. Since I joined this committee last year, we have focused on the importance of developing a workforce that meets the needs of our economy. A large part of developing a strong workforce is challenging students academically and socially to prepare them for life outside of the classroom. Mr. Runko, how does accurate grading improve students socially and academically?
Yeah, so accurate grading the grading is a measurement for the question of, is my child learning? And so it's important that we answer that question truthfully. With some equity initiatives, they're trying to address the uncomfortable situation of telling a parent, no, your child is not learning. But the only way we can get honest assessment if this child is learning and is ready to enter the next phase of life after K-12 education is if we answer that question honestly and put them on a plan to address any gaps if needed.
Thank you. If these students aren't learning these lessons in their K-12 classroom, how does this impact their college and career readiness?
There was a really shocking article that came out last year from the New York Post, and it said, the title was "The Shocking Rise of Gen Z College Freshmen Who Can't Even Do Basic Math." So I imagine the challenge is, particularly for parents, if you're paying thousands or tens of $1,000s to pay for a math class that your child should have taken in K-12, that just reduces the return on investment for families.
Thank you. And how does blocking student access to algebra in the 8th grade inhibit their ability to complete their college level math before they're out of high school?
Right. So we're seeing colleges and universities increasingly offering remedial math, which is alarming in and of itself. But just the reversal of that policy by San Francisco Unified shows what a bad decision it was in the first place.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Representative Mannion of New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for participating today. I think it's important to clarify that when we're talking about equity in education, we're talking about raising the bar when it comes to education, never lowering the bar, contrary to what we're hearing at times today. What some of my colleagues on our side of the dais have mentioned is that as we're trying to make sure that there's opportunity for everyone, we must acknowledge what has happened in the past, the impact of slavery, of Jim Crow, of segregation, of education segregation, of redlining, and all of those things have led to impoverished communities, disproportionately Black and brown impoverished communities. And as a result, what we see, the one direct correlation that can almost always be drawn is that when we see lower reading levels or lower graduation rates, what is directly proportional to that are high rates of poverty. And that exists whether it is an urban setting or a rural setting. So I'm going to tell you a quick story before I get back to some of my remarks here, which is what we've already heard related to cuts in funding. So in the last Congress, with a Republican majority, appropriated dollars went to a public university to expand their number of students and eventually practitioners as school counselors, social workers, school psychologists to help with mental health issues in our schools. That funding was approved and appropriated. The power of the purse falls within Congress. But this administration came in and cut that funding to the tune of $3.8 million when that program was designed to expand so that children dealing with trauma can learn, as we've discussed already in this hearing. The word Black or Latino or brown or indigenous was not in that grant request. One word was that caused it to be cut: poverty. The one indicator that's directly proportional to lower learning outcomes. And I want to level set on the competition that exists with charter schools. It is not a fair competition. Charter schools, corporate charter schools, have lower rates of students enrolled with disabilities, 504 plans and IEPs, lower rates of English language learners. If there are students that are subjected to disciplinary actions, they can leave the charter system and go back to the traditional public system. They also can hold reserve funds, unlike public schools, to make sure that they have graduated programs and gifted and learning programs. So it is not a fair fight, including the co-location of charter schools within traditional public schools. All of those things skew the numbers dramatically, as do standardized tests that have been found to be biased against certain communities. So we can talk about excellence and we can talk about raising the bar, but if we throw the letters D, E, I at things and think that that is going to raise the bar for everyone, it's lowering the bar when we attack those systems that are specifically designed, and again, dollars that were appropriated by a previous Congress, a Republican Congress, that acknowledged that poverty and the trauma that's caused by poverty is impactful on our educational institutions. And because of the institutional dynamic that has existed in this country for a very long time, disproportionately harmful towards African Americans and Latinos. So I thank you for listening to my comments here, but sometimes we get away from the reality of what has existed in this country. My quick question to Ms. Turnage Young is that, based on your work at LDF and your perspective as a civil rights litigator, how do you see the shifts in federal attention towards culture war debates? How does that affect our ability to confront the real structural barriers that exist in educational opportunities?
To the extent that we're talking about imagined problems, we are being distracted from the actual problems and challenges that we should be working together to overcome. I will note, for example, I'm happy to see so much attention being paid to, hey, we should have equal opportunity in our schools. I think I've heard all of the witnesses talk about equal opportunity. That's fantastic. But there are actual problems we should be talking about. For example, only 50% of our schools in this country offer calculus. Only 38% of schools that have a majority Black or Latinx population offer calculus. It might be no surprise that given that uneven access, many of our students are not able to take calculus by the time they graduate from high school. What can we do?
Representative Miller of Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our schools should be places where our children can reach their full God-given potential. Far too many schools now have equity policies that rob students of these opportunities. Democrat-led cities and states have launched a direct attack on accelerated learning, labeling them as racist and exclusive. Despite their widespread success, cities like New York, Seattle, and San Francisco have discontinued accelerated learning programs in their schools. Additionally, New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani, former Mayor Bill de Blasio, have actively gone after high-performing charter schools, accusing them of siphoning resources away from public schools. Furthermore, cities like Portland and San Diego have encouraged teachers to ignore unsubmitted assignments and offer unlimited retakes. I don't know how that is keeping the standard high or promoting academic rigor. Parents want more gifted learning choices for their children, but DEI policies are harming the very kids they were intended to help. Families that can afford to will send their children to private schools, including Democrat representatives, and there is a significant number of them today and in the past that have advocated against school choice, but yet they send their own children to private schools. Disadvantaged children are stuck in a failing system. And I will say that the most racist thing going on in our country is forcing inner city disadvantaged Black and brown children to have to stay in failing schools that have been failing for decades. Academics should be based solely on merit, and we must return to those standards. And I do want to make another comment about something Ms. Young said. She said, talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. And I would like to say it is because Democrats and teachers unions advocate not for the student, but for the system, the failing system. And eliminating accelerated learning programs will make the system more of a failure. So my question for Mr. Runko, education is a state and local issue, but Congress has control of federal funding. What are some ways that Congress can address equity policies and stop Democrat mayors from discriminating against charter schools?
Thank you for the question. I think a couple ways come to mind. One, when an equity policy goes into the realm of being discriminatory, the Department of Education can investigate and withhold funds if needed. For example, my organization recently filed a complaint against Los Angeles Unified, which the Department of Education is investigating over their Black Student Achievement Plan, which is excluding students based on race. Another way is to prioritize charter school program funds for cities that are actually prioritizing charter schools. I'd say if a mayor of a city is anti-charter school, it would make sense maybe not to prioritize them for hamstringing charter schools and then funding them for the hamstringing.
Thank you. My next question is to Ms. Chin. In your written testimony, you mentioned how many other countries are outperforming the United States academically. What policies foster this, and how can the U.S. emulate them?
How they achieve it is by focus on academics, first of all. You don't have equity policies, you don't have equity grading. You have assessments, you have high standards. You have that kind of necessity not to have low expectations. This bigotry of low expectations is extremely, extremely racist. when we just assume that certain people cannot perform? No, that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to say that to be competitive, we have to have these qualities, to be very, very careful about the academics first. What are schools about? And then later, you do have, in all of these countries that succeed, a focus on the students by their abilities and their levels, because you cannot teach properly. This is a burden on our teachers to teach properly for each cohort, for the peers to excel.
And I would like to add that we should not be wasting time, precious classroom time, hypersexualizing our children. And with that, I will yield back.
Representative Hayes of Connecticut is recognized.
Thank you. Since the start of this administration, we've seen efforts to dismantle the Department of Education. Just last March, President Trump signed an executive order directing the secretary to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education. I can tell you that most classroom teachers don't think about the day-to-day operations of the Department of Education. They shouldn't have to, because things like civil rights protections, things like making sure schools are well-resourced, things like making sure that we are infusing the teacher pipeline with highly qualified educators are things that should happen outside of the classroom so that a teacher can just close their door and teach. I know this because I am a teacher. I also know that much of what we're hearing and talking about here today is not how it works in the classroom. You talk about, Ms. Chin, countries around the world that are outperforming our U.S. education system. Those countries are also prioritizing high-quality teacher training, prioritizing the holistic child. Many of those countries have universal healthcare systems so that families are not worrying about those things. They have high-quality childcare programs so that parents are home with their children at the beginning of their life to begin to foster some of those things. So we're not comparing apples to apples here. There are lots of things that we're talking about here that just really isn't how it works. Mr. Runko, you talked about being honest about assessments. I can tell you that a standardized test is not the only way to assess a child. There were many students in my classroom where it appeared that they didn't get it based on what was on the paper, but then when you had a conversation and pulled it out of them, you understood, no, they understand the concept. It's this whole testing strategy that does not work for them. I come from the state of Connecticut, where we have some of the largest equity gaps in education, some of the highest performing boarding schools in the world, and some of the lowest performing community schools in the country. And many of those places are 5 miles apart. And they're resourced differently. The people who are standing in front of those kids are different. The environments they come from is different. And that's not victimization. That's just a snapshot of what we're dealing with and what it looks like. One of the first things you learn in teacher preparation is when you're writing an IEP, when you're writing a lesson plan, it is an individualized assessment. You can't deal with students individually without considering their race, their demographics, their community, all of those things. All of those things are part of the way we instruct the whole child. So it is, I mean, this hearing and many hearings like it are just remarkable because I refuse to be lectured by people who are draining the resources to keep our kids competitive. Ms. Turnage-Young, my question is for you. What do you see as potential harms to students and broader threats to educational quality and equity if the department is dismantled, the Department of Education, and what safeguards can Congress begin to put in place for those things?
So from my years of work as an attorney, I've encountered many school districts where we have a recurring problem. The school district is not placing Black and Latinx students who score highly in math, for example, in advanced math courses. Or, as in the case of Philadelphia, a fourth of the Black and Latinx students who obtained the minimum score required to qualify for the selective admissions schools there were not admitted. They were admitting students of other races who did not get the required score. And it was based on principle of discretion. That's the sort of thing we see again and again and again. We support all students having an equal opportunity to access advanced academic programs, and that's something that the U.S. Department of Education can help with because, of course, it is there to uphold our civil rights laws.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The department can address things like educator shortage or outdated facilities or inconsistent access to advanced coursework. Those are the things that we can address to deal with this issue. A lot of times for many of the courses, finding an educator that is qualified to teach it, you know, having someone who is prepared to meet those needs of students with disabilities or facilities challenges or all of those things. Those are the things that the department can be working on to level this playing field of access. So these attacks on DEI really does not understand what education is supposed to do. It is supposed to educate the individual, and you can't do that without first acknowledging who our students are. With that, I yield back.
Representative Owens of Utah is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This, for convenience, a very, very important hearing on education malpractice. Equitable grading policies will not teach our children how to succeed or how to push through adversity. Instead, they're teaching them it's okay to miss deadlines or to turn assignments in late. Some of these grading policies will give students credit when they fail to submit their work. As a common sense adult, we all know this is wrong and not based on reality. These students will grow up without discipline to pay their bills on time. They will think work deadlines are flexible. They will set themselves up to failure, believing that in the real world, they will be rewarded by laziness, the lack of commitment and discipline. Success will come only to our children when we teach them to dream big, to meet high expectations. But this only comes when those that are teaching them have high expectations for them. When we instead judge their potential based on their background or color, this is nothing more than age-old racism. It's actually the most devious type of racism because it's not the obvious, in-your-face hate. It's instead soft bigotry of low expectations with a big smile and a big hug. I grew up in the 60s seeing both hard and soft bigotry of low expectations, at the time from white Americans. A generation later, I saw this full circle as my oldest daughter went through a phase of being called names because she exceeded the low expectations of her Black schoolmates. Because she worked hard, got good grades, respected herself and others, was articulate, she was accused of trying to be white. The real success of hate-filled racism is when the targeted minority communities finally accept failure as the truth, when it accepts the merit is not only not believable, but is indeed an insult. The soft bigotry of low expectations runs rampant in the Democrat-run cities and states as they proactively get rid of accelerated and gifted programs for high-achieving minority students. They simultaneously lower the standards for other hardworking students. This is a standard that most Americans would never believe is a goal of an institution of education, to accept equity of ignorance. It is to accept the bar of equity that's so low that anyone who exhibits any potential of intellectual intelligence feels that they're an embarrassment to their race. No young Black child desiring to be accepted wants their friends thinking he's willing to insult his race by trying to act white. This effort by Democrats to lower intellectual expectations for minorities is working throughout this country as planned. In Baltimore, 13 high schools have zero proficiency in math from their students. Democrat politicians and public school leaders think this is normal. In California, in 2017, 75% of Black boys could not read and write at grade level. But Black and white bigots feel this is normal. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about this, why merit and education matters. I think at the end of the day, we treat our kids the way we'd like us to be treated, with high expectations, dreaming big, and not telling them that we can. I think we'll get a lot further with how we're succeeding with our education system. Ms. Chin, your testimony stated that lowering standards to equalize outcomes hurts all students, but struggling and outcomes hurt all students, both struggling and advanced students. I completely agree. I think it's obvious how lowered standards harm advanced students, but why? But can we talk about why the lowered standards are so harmful for struggling students?
If you lower the standards, the kids will work even at a lower pace. We know that. We know that if you have high standards, they have to try to meet them. If they fail, that's one thing. If you lower, they will try even less. And we've heard that several times. This is irrational. This is human behavior. If you say that you could get away with doing less, most kids will do less. That is rational, unless we believe our kids are not rational. We're not trying for that, right? So we have to stay the course, have high expectations of our kids, have academic quality studies so that they don't divert themselves into equity studies. That other countries are not doing. I should also mention that for all the other countries, it is not true that they have all of those other aspects of total health care, et cetera, so that they could achieve. It was usually the reverse, in fact.
Okay,
Thank
thank you. Ms. Runko, I'm troubled that so many schools have embraced equity policies. The immediate impact is obvious. Students are going to be held less accountable, learn less, and struggle to succeed academically. What do you think is the long-term effects of this might be?
Yeah, I think workforce readiness comes to mind. If we're not preparing our students to enter the workforce, then employers can't find workers for the jobs, and not having a great workforce is bad for America.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. You're back.
The ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Scott, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Young, you mentioned the results where fewer African Americans proportionally were in an advanced course because they were screened out by teachers and principals. Is it unusual for blacks to represent a smaller portion of gifted and talented courses than those who would actually qualify?
Unfortunately, Black students are often under-identified for advanced academic programs and for gifted and talented programs for known correctable reasons. I would implore this committee to try to work to address that issue. It's a long-standing one.
Thank you. And what happened at Thomas Jefferson High School?
So if you're referring to the Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology in Fairfax County, Virginia, that's a selective admissions school. It serves several different counties in Northern Virginia. They changed their admissions policy to get rid of the $100 application fee. They also nixed the admissions test. They decreed that 1.5% of the 8th grade class at each eligible middle school would have a spot at the school. And they put in place, some other assessments. After the application fee was removed, and of course the research tells us that application fees can discourage applications because some students just can't afford them. I think something like 1,000 additional applicants applied. You ended up having an admitted class that had a much higher average GPA than previous classes. There were more girls that were admitted. Previously, only one low-income Asian American student had been admitted. That next year, 51 low-income Asian American students were admitted. More Black students were admitted. More Latinx students were admitted. And so what you saw is by allowing every student a more equal chance to compete for admission, more students felt welcome to apply, and more students were identified as being able to thrive in this program.
Thank you. We've heard a lot about merit. Can you tell us a little bit about the merit of standardized tests like SAT and other screening standardized tests?
Yes, to be clear, LDF certainly supports high standards. We certainly, we don't oppose tests per se. What we oppose is tests being misused. Often tests are being used in ways that the test developers themselves don't advise. Tests are not supposed to be used as like the one criterion that people are looking at. And certainly we want to make sure that tests have both content validity and predictive validity, meaning that we want to make sure those tests are measuring what they claim to measure and that they are actually predicting success in the setting that they're being used to assess. And too often, our tests are not doing that. Right? So there is a growing body of research that shows that tests are often under-predicting the potential of Black students, Latinx students, students whose colloquialisms that are being used in the home are different from that of the test makers. And what's happening is that the language that's being used in the test makers' homes is actually getting into the test. And so differences in semantics are actually making it so that those scores for Black examinees, Latinx examinees are being artificially depressed so that those tests are not actually a good indicia of whether those students can succeed.
Thank you. And in your testimony, you mentioned federal courts have ruled that the 2025 Department of Education guidance on equity policies was unlawful. What was wrong with those policies?
There are a number of legal infirmities in those policies. We had 3 different federal courts across the country that all found legal infirmities in those policies and enjoined them. Ultimately, those policies were vacated, and we were able to negotiate a favorable settlement. Those policies were pronounced to be unconstitutionally vague. Those policies were pronounced to be a violation of our Administrative Procedures Act. The real issue with the policies is that they were attacking lawful efforts to advance equal opportunity that are known to support learning in many of our students. And so, unfortunately, we had a situation where the federal government was telling educators, hey, we're going to cut your federal funding and perhaps charge you with False Claims Act liability if you don't stop doing these things. And these things was vague. So you did have educators who were, stopping tutoring programs, stopping mentoring programs, stopping outreach programs, stopping services for students with disabilities, cutting off talks by professionals, cutting all Black History Month celebrations, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Moylan of Guam is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Volk, thank you also for your testimony today on looking at measures we can improve and reform our gifted education programs. Many of my constituents on Guam, it's quite a ways way out there in the Pacific, and in fact, I just came back last night, it's 15 time zones away, and we crossed the date line as well. We're really out there. Our education system is, I think, really good. Many of our families, kids go to public schools and also private schools, work really hard to put their kids to private schools, and now we're even expanding our charter schools too. Because where do we go from there for our kids? We don't have doctorates degrees for medical doctors or dentists or lawyer degrees, and to get that talent to come back home, we had to go off island, thousands of dollars, out-of-state tuition, and just being away from home. So I think it's important that we really support our gifted and talented and promoting that education there. So what can you say for us that how can Congress support this in the states, but most importantly for our territories like Guam and our other territories?
I understand the difficulty in kind of having some difficulty in homegrown, perhaps, education workforce, but it might encourage you to know that there's no correlation between traditional teacher prep and student outcomes. So I think grow your own programs, focusing on advanced learning, expanding choice to elite private schools, charter schools, which allow access to all that can function incredibly well. That's going to be the pathway to creating the workforce that you need to staff the schools that can train students for whatever career that it is that they want for their future.
Thank you for that. So Guam is also part of the Second Island chain, and the defense of the nation is relying on the Second Island chain. We're the hub, most western soil of the United States in our Indo-PACOM area. So Mr. Runko and Ms. Chen, you both discussed in your testimonies the importance of merit-based and value culture of academic excellence. Explain to me or expand upon how the federal government can help support our states and especially our territories to work together for our educators, for our students, and for our parents to give that culture of academic excellence.
I think that the first thing that we have to do is reinforce this notion of, as you say, excellence. When we have people who are ready to erode at every point and say that our students from any corner of our territories or on the mainland USA, that they can not live up to the highest potential, that is a mistake. We should also insist that we focus on STEM, because STEM is highly measurable and it is highly needed for our future.
The only thing I'd add is I think it's really interesting what the Department of Education is doing with funding waivers. So if a state perhaps wants to put more money into its gifted and talented programs, potentially advanced coursework, I think the state could work with the Department of Education on a funding waiver to use their funds more flexibly.
Thank you, panel. And I just wanted to share as a member of Congress, one of the great jobs I get to do is do some challenges for the students to put their artwork in the halls of Congress, right? And that's something I enjoy, seeing these kids who are so talented in displaying their art and having them achieve that to have their art displayed in Congress. Another one is our application challenge, where they make these wonderful computer programs or using AI now. It's just amazing how talented these folks are. And the most honorable, I gotta say, I have the job of doing is recommending folks for the military academies. These folks are tremendous in their grades, their civic duties, and their physical fitness, that they had to work really hard to be officers and for our service. And I really applaud the hard work that they do, and to be having that opportunity to recommend them and see them move forward. I'm very happy that our education system is promoting this excellence. So I thank you very much for your statements, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thanks very much. I'll now recognize Ranking Member Bonamici for a closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for this interesting conversation. I want to emphasize that no one is suggesting that we should not have great schools or that we should lower expectations or standards, but we should ask, what can we do to expand opportunity to help all students do well and thrive? And the majority may suggest that it's getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Obviously, we have pointed out many reasons why we disagree. Also, so many issues discussed today, including grading policies, those are decisions and policies made by school boards, not by Congress. It's a bit confusing to hear the majority continuously say, give education back to the states, but then complain when the school boards of the states do something that they don't like. And with regard to the comment about high school students not doing well in math or needing remedial writing instruction, that's not because of DEI, maybe AI, but not DEI. Those are not the reasons why. And following up on Representative Hayes, who is a National Teacher of the Year, her comment on assessments, and Ms. Turnage Young's comments about the assessment quality or lack thereof, I just want to quote, or not quote, but refer to education scholar Dr. Yang Zhao, who grew up in rural China, went to school in a system that focused on getting good test scores. He's a critic of education focused on just getting good test scores. And he says that high-stakes standardized test scores do not measure and, in fact, often stifle creativity and an entrepreneurial spirit. And we need to keep that in mind when we're talking about assessments that should be used to inform instruction. Mr. Chairman, the term equity is not a partisan invention. It's grounded in a straightforward principle. The dictionary definition is about fairness and justice and how people are treated, and freedom from disparities that are based on race, gender, or background. This should not be controversial. Yet we've seen colleagues attempt to recast this basic idea of human decency into something that's suspect or even harmful. When did fairness become a problem? When did having a public school system in which every student has an opportunity to learn and thrive, no matter who they are or where they come from, when did that become a point of contention? The federal government should promote educational equity so all students can succeed, not just the privileged. We should be able to agree on that, but too often, access to gifted and talented programs or other advanced coursework is limited by a lack of resources, by a failure to provide accommodations, and honestly, by bias. These hurdles prevent many students from access to rigorous classes in which they very well may thrive and do well and excel. And again, all students, regardless of race, gender, socioeconomic status, disability, or zip code, they all deserve the opportunity to pursue advanced coursework that's commensurate with their abilities. I remain concerned that my colleagues' rhetoric represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what equity in education means. Black and brown children and children with disabilities deserve access to advanced coursework and gifted and talented programs, period. But again, every student deserves access to a challenging education that makes them thrive. And as I noted, contrary to the title of this hearing, excellence and equity are not mutually exclusive. I'm disappointed that today represents yet another missed opportunity to address the real problems facing students and teachers, the Trump administration's relentless attacks on public education. By dismantling the Department of Education, the Trump administration has undermined our ability to study academic trends and provide guidance and oversight. Congress should not be standing idly by while our public education system and the Department of Education itself is on the chopping block. It's time to stand up for students' needs and uplift public education instead of sabotaging it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much to all of our witnesses. Equity, properly understood, is a laudable and necessary goal of education. I'd argue it's a cornerstone of our social contract. But what today's hearing has shown is that the term has been co-opted in service of an agenda that produces manifest inequities that harms the very students that it purports to help and that makes everyone worse off. We see this in attacks on charter schools. Support for charters should be overwhelming and bipartisan, and yet we heard just total falsehoods uttered during this hearing in an attempt to discredit them. To be clear, charters are public schools that are tuition-free, that are open to all, where seats have to be lotteried if they're oversubscribed, that usually are underfunded compared to district schools. For example, Success Academy has become the top performing network of schools in New York, despite getting something like 30% less per pupil funding. And all of the factors that were raised to discredit them, the studies that show that charters get substantially more learning overall account for all of these. The Stanford Credo study is the gold standard. Often the methodology involves looking at an oversubscribed charter and then looking at the students who won the lottery versus those who didn't and couldn't go there and seeing their learning outcomes over time, so you have like a natural controlled experiment. So our goal should be to make it so you don't have to do a lottery, that there are enough seats available at high-performing schools. That's actually what a bill that Representative Owens and I are sponsoring, the High Quality Charter School Act, would do. We also see this in the effort to remove advanced learning opportunities from the public school system. And what the evidence and common sense overwhelmingly show is that when you do that, those opportunities are monopolized by those who have the means to pursue them outside of the public education system, thereby exacerbating inequities. Whereas when you have an objective system for identifying the students who are well suited to those opportunities within the public education system, it produces much more equitable results in terms of who gets access. We see this overall trend perhaps most clearly in my own state of California, where for many years there have been efforts to deny advanced learning opportunities, to not teach algebra, teaching reading the wrong way, attacking charter schools and other options for families, lowering expectations and eliminating accountability. And what do we see as a result? We see at UC San Diego, 1 out of every 8 students needs remedial math. We see that students from low-income families in California fare almost the worst of any in the country on an apples-to-apples comparison. We see the highest illiteracy rate of any state in the country. And yes, absolutely, there are clear links between not getting a high-quality education and life outcomes like poverty. California also has the highest poverty rate of any state in the country. But it does not have to be this way. There are great examples across the United States, whether it's charters like Success or KIPP, whether it's the amazing success story in New Orleans after Katrina, whether it's the many outstanding school districts and district schools that exist across this country, that follow the principles of high expectations, that embrace a paradigm of excellence, that cultivate the talents of all students, that empower families with choices, that support teachers. These are principles that all schools and all districts across this country can adopt and that we'll continue to advocate for on this committee, because the stakes could not be higher for millions of kids of this country as well as our country's future. There being no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
Well, y'all, we did it. Congratulations, lefties. For the first time in 30 years, you have achieved the opposite of what you have said every single time one of y'all tries to kill one of us. It is the weirdest thing because now the Wall Street Journal is all of a sudden citing data that says lefties are now the most violent political affiliation out there. And that's only government. That's not including personal assassinations and out-of-government assassinations and violence and burning things down. Y'all, if you needed more proof and evidence to fully put a lid on this bad boy, this video is going to be that one. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn the notification bell on. We have got freedom to espouse every single day, dispelling propaganda wherever we find it, and 100% clickbait free. Y'all, I'm going to be real with you. What we're about to show is going to make some people very cranky. Not on our side, because we've just been vindicated. All right. Here we go. You can follow me on X at Braden LOA. And of course, I will be live tonight around 9 p.m. Eastern time, give or take plus a few minutes because, life. Anyway, Wall Street Journal bombshell. Anti-government violence in America just hit a 30-year high in what's called the year of the Molotov cocktail. You know, all the language harkening back to the 60s, where there was a lot of civil unrest as well from the lefties. It's amazing how every time they get their panties in a wad, stuff starts burning down. For the first time in 20 years, the progressive left is the most violent side, again, only towards government. By a considerable margin, the data doesn't lie. The radical left has a serious violence problem. Yeah, no kidding. Wall Street Journal, everything is linked. I bring all the receipts. I bring everything to you. I'm not out here to lie to you. I'm just going to show you what's happening as the great aggregator of freedom, because all the things that I'm about to show you point in a very concerning direction. If you're in the Democrat Party and you're a little bit concerned with the Bolshevik wing of which you are fostering. Let's continue. Let's keep on going. Here's the actual article. Again, of course, it is cited in the description box below. Always bringing the good stuff. Here you go. Domestic attacks and plots targeting the U.S. government. U.S. government. This does not include burning cities down. This does not include ICE riots. This does not include immigration riots. This does not include political assassinations of thought leaders on the right, Charlie Kirk specifically. Supreme Court justices, none of that. This is only when they do it specifically on the U.S. government. Yeah. Please keep telling me through your SPLC-funded sourcing that says right is the most violent extreme. Yes. Nope. It's coming from the left. The bullets are flying from one direction, left to right. Let's keep on trucking. The incident, of course, talking about the assassination attempt over the weekend, allegedly perpetrated by a 31-year-old Caltech grad, it's on camera, has refocused attention on rising violence in American politics. In fact, domestic attacks and plots against the U.S. government are at their highest levels since at least 1994, according to the data from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. For the first time in 20 years, they are coming from extremists on the left in greater numbers than on the right, the center's data show. And I want to be very specific about this. Come here real quick. This is not specifically all violence. Right? The left likes to put this little narrative out there that says, hey, you can do all these things and say all these things because the right is the most violent amongst all of us. No, it's not. That is completely and totally incorrect. What you're watching right now through this reporting is only U.S. government related. So if someone picks up a bomb or a gun and goes after a government building or a government fed or a government agent or something of that nature, you're not even talking about all the burning down of buildings, as I mentioned. You're not talking about the ICE riots, the throwing things at cars, at police cars, the assaulting MAGA, assaulting conservatives because they don't agree with them politically, assassinating Charlie Kirk. You're not even talking about those. You're only talking about the government. Just to put that in perspective. Yeah, it's not even close, especially since there's 8 million clips of them, videos of them openly saying, what did Hassan Piker say? Let the capitalist blood run in the streets. Yeah, that's not Cesar. That is not Chavez in Cuba. No, that's a guy here in the United States leading the progressive left thought movement. Half the incidents from the extreme left last year appear to have been aimed at immigration officers or facilities in response to Trump administration's immigration crackdown. You know, like all the things that we've been documenting. Classifying extremism attacks is a murky business, and I've got a follow-up on this. Batya Unger Sargon did an amazing piece, again, aggregating all this together for you. Please send this stuff out. It's very important. The CIS data sorts attacks by political leanings where possible based on court documents and contemporaneous reporting. perpetrators often don't fit into neat categories. Some attacks on U.S. political figures, like the one on Democratic Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, whose residence was set on fire last year, were allegedly motivated by events abroad. Well, that's a nice way to say the Gaza conflict, where a lefty wanted to burn the house down. And that's all the different weapons used. I don't really care about that right now. However, last year's weapon of choice was the Molotov cocktail. That crude incendiary device, symbolic of revolutionary politics, featured in at least 7 attacks or plots, including the one on Shapiro's residence and 2 efforts to attack immigration agents. All of these causes are left-wing causes, people. Now let's get over to the Betch's reporting. Again, this is excellent reporting. Everything's linked in the description box below. Go check this stuff out yourself. An example of how they cook the books to absolve the left of violence in the Wall Street Journal today. A graph it published that seems to show near parity between left and right-wing political violence is sourced to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which by its own admission reclassified pro-Palestinian violence as ethno-nationalist. They're cooking the books. Okay, let me finish this and I'll get this point. It classifies all anti-Semitism as right-wing, which is funny because all the anti-Semites live on the frickin' left. Good God. And all pro-Palestinian attacks on Jewish individuals or institutions as ethno-nationalist. They're completely and totally changing definitions. This is just nakedly partisan propaganda presented as data and then mainstreamed in the American press. More in my column below linked. And I'm going to show you that column in a second. And we're going to elaborate a lot more in the live stream tonight, because this is about our country and our very lives. This is very important stuff, particularly for the next generation and the children of which we are bringing into our country. So if you are in the 20s and 30s group, send this out, please, to them. If you're in here, get in here. You have to understand what they do to you. And this is probably what my monologue is going to be tonight in my live stream. The left operates in a world of obfuscation. They will completely and totally lie through either omission or changing definitions. I can do this all day long. I can do this around abortion, where it's no longer a baby. Now it's a zygote, or now it's a several clump of cells. So it's not a baby. We don't call it a baby. So therefore you can kill a clump of cells. That's fine. They do it all the time. You want to do immigration? Illegal alien. Oh, can't say that. Undocumented migrant seeking asylum. Well, that's okay. Or you can go down this road, for example, where they've changed the definition of this as ethno-nationalist. This is what they do. They lie and manipulate through the changing of definitions. I can do this all day long. I have been a student of this for 30 years. Rush baby through and through. But you have to fully understand how they lie to you and how they do it. They do it through changing definitions. Do you remember the Biden administration when there was a recession and they were like, no, it's not a recession because it doesn't feel like a recession. But there's been 3 different consecutive quarters of negative growth. But does it feel like a recession? I mean, it does. We should really just change it to how the feels and the vibes are. They always do this. Let's continue. Debunking the data that claims to show most political violence comes from the right, there's a lot of funky data out there being compiled by nakedly partisan organizations and spread as though it's factual by the liberal media. And here's the column. And again, check it out. It's in the description box. Okay. This is the actual column that she wrote. And I got a few points that I want to show you, the important stuff that she brought to attention. If you pull up the data center yourself, you can see immediately that is deeply flawed. Again, this is all the stuff that she said in that earlier text. If you walk through all of this, which I've highlighted, I actually don't want to go through all of it. I want to jump to the very end of this. Here you go. You can find people on the list who did things like vandalize an LGBTQ crosswalk, though not people who vandalized entire neighborhoods in 2020 in the name of racial justice. It's all games. Oh my God, did you leave a skid mark on a LGBTQ crosswalk? Hate crime, violence, political violence. Did you burn an entire neighborhood down to the ground in 2020 because you wanted to get back at some sort of political grievance? Yeah, you did. Oh, no, that's fine. That's not political violence at all. See how this works? It's just, is vandalism political violence? I guess only if you're a conservative. All the numbers that they're cooking are completely fictitious. Here's the example of what she's saying, where they redefine everything. In this data set, these attacks are classified as ethno-nationalist incidents rather than left-wing ones. They're changing the books all over the place, just like they do with everything else. They are actively manipulating reality for their own benefit. We keep on trucking. It's just truly wild. The bottom line here, and I'll do much more of this on my live stream tonight because we're over the target on this one. And let me hear you in the comments if you agree. They are actively changing all of the statistics and data so that they can say the right-wing points are the ones that are the issue. And then Democrats pick it up and run with it, even though it's a complete and total fabrication and lie, and the media parrots it and echoes it. We now have our own media. We now have our own eyes. I can watch and show you everything and link it all in the description box below. These people are actively manipulating you while they try to kill you. Not the media, not the Democrats, the far left Bolsheviks who are trying to bring about social revolution through socialism and communism in the United States. You're looking at it. And I can't wait to see you tonight at the live stream. I'm Braden. Later.
From Washington, I'll now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ferrara, how many churches and crisis pregnancy centers were attacked in the aftermath of the Dobbs leak and the Dobbs decision? Do you remember?
Mr. Ferrara, can you please use your microphone?
I don't have the exact number, but it was many. And I'm involved in one particular case, the firebombing of a pro-life pregnancy center in Amherst, New York, causing $500,000 in damage and injuring 2 of the firemen.
Well, I will tell you, I think there were hundreds. I'll just give you a little sampling. You talked about the firebombing of that place. There was another place firebombed in Madison, Wisconsin on May 8, 2022. Next day, May 9th, 3 Catholic churches in Texas were attacked. 2 days later, in Michigan, activists vandalized the Family Life Services Pregnancy Center. And I have actually, I think it's like 10 pages. We did a list of this back during the leak and the Dobbs opinion. I have 10 pages just listing churches, crisis pregnancy centers that were attacked. And do you remember some of the groups that were attacking these churches and crisis pregnancy centers, Mr. Farrar?
Jane was here.
Yeah, Jane's Revenge, Ruth Sent Us. Do you happen to know if any of those organizations made the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate list?
Of course not.
No, they didn't, did they?
No, the Southern Poverty Law Center is not a credible organization. In fact, if you, as a conservative activist, are condemned by the Southern Poverty Law Center, consider that a resume builder.
They condemned Moms for Liberty. They condemned the Family Research Council. They condemned Alliance Defending Freedom. They may have even went after your group. I don't know. I mean, any pro-life group, it seemed like they were going to attack. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is. I'd like to make a point about what Congresswoman Jayapal said regarding a public safety law. There is no federal police power over the states. So the idea that you would like to have a public safety law that caters to your particular interest in receiving reproductive health services is contrary to the whole principle of federalism. And that's the problem with FACE, that FACE purports to exercise a generalized federal police power in one area and one area only, and that being the activity of pro-life activists.
Yeah, Mr. Severino, let me come to you. We know that the Biden Justice Department, the Biden FBI was actually paying confidential human sources to do all kinds of things. I mean, we're trying to get some answer to that. I'm just curious, do you think maybe some of the same folks, so the Biden Justice Department was working with the Southern Poverty Law Center to train prosecutors as if they were going to get some great wisdom from the SPLC. They were doing that. We know they were paying confidential human sources. Do you think it's a fair question to say, I wonder if any of these, quote, informants of the SPLC were also being paid by the federal government? Think that's a fair question?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, why wouldn't they double dip? It's like if the Southern Poverty Law Center is training the prosecutors, and I know the FBI is going to pay confidential human sources, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, well, sugar, I can get money from both of them. $3 million from the SPLC, and who knows what the federal government is going to pay out. They got a pretty big bank account too. I think that's a fair question that we'd like to get the answer to.
We should get to the bottom of it. And what the DOJ report on the FACE Act showed was that, in fact, DOJ was in cahoots with outside groups.
Exactly.
Similar to SPLC. The left-wing groups, they get together and they pretty much create their own little branch offices within the DOJ whenever you have liberals in power. So SPLC has been talking to the DOJ under Biden and certain Obama. Planned Parenthood Federation, National Abortion Federation, all of those folks, they pretty much open up their branch offices in DOJ when the left is in power.
Yes, you anticipated my next question, because that's exactly where I wanted to go. Do you think any of these informants actually were involved in the attacks on the churches and crisis pregnancy centers? I think that's a fair question as well.
It's a possibility. That would be terrible if, in fact, our own government was funding.
Well, I think maybe what the SPLC calls informants, we might call instigators, based on what you saw in the indictment last week.
Sure.
So I don't know that it's out of the realm of possibility. If they're, I mean, we don't know, but I think it's a fair guess to say they might have been double dipping, getting paid by the government and the SPLC. Maybe they were instigating some of these over 10 pages, 100 different attacks on crisis pregnancy centers and churches in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision.
Well, we know that a DOJ official actually endorsed a grant application for one of these abortion activist groups, which is a clear ethical violation that the DOJ report said is very likely being investigated for an ethics breach. So this sort of too cozy relationship is something that is very common that we see in abortion and SPLC. Any of these hot button issues from the left, you see this sort of collusion.
Yeah. I think, again, I want to thank our witnesses. Ms. Edel, I'm sorry I didn't get to you. I listened to your testimony, but I was in a meeting backstage. But when you came on, I turned on the TV to hear what you had to say. So God bless you. We appreciate your Christian witness and your words. And with that, I yield back to the chairman.
Nevada, a state with nothing but casinos, Gordon Ramsay game shows, and aliens.
Don't bring me into this, big boy.
They thought they could hide the aliens in the desert, but today we uncover the truth. We are going to find Area 51, okay? I know what you're thinking. We already know where it is, but that place is a diversion for very low IQ people. I have been wandering in the desert for many hours and have had to overcome many obstacles, including wild beasts. Well, what do you want? Go away, camel. Nobody likes you. You're a radical maniac.
Oh, don't be like that, little T. Everybody loves camels. I know a great camel joke. Want to hear it?
I'm not little T, okay? The name is Trumpy. Everybody says so. So just go ahead with your very pathetic joke.
Okay. What is a camel's favorite day of the week?
I don't know. Kamala, what is it?
It's hump day. Oh, come on. Doug loves that joke. He tells it every time the nanny comes over.
Kamala, we don't have time to talk about your horrible marriage, okay? We need to get rid of this horrible camel.
Oh, I'll take care of that.
What are you talking about?
Look, Donald, I'm on the camel. This is just like when I got to drive the yellow school bus.
All right. Well, you have fun riding your camel like a lunatic. I'm going to go find the aliens. All right. I have been walking for so long that my very impressive leg muscles have grown tired, but I'm getting close to the alien stronghold. I could really go for a ice cold Diet Coke right about now. Well, we've made it to this frankly very pathetic building. I could have built this much larger for way less money with better materials. I'm very good at building things. Everybody says so. We are now inside Area 51, and I have to say it's being run by a bunch of morons, okay? There is no security anywhere. They let me walk right through the front door. This is pathetic. We found the problem. All the aliens at Area 51 are illegals. They are making the illegal aliens work at Area 51. They have mummified the real aliens and put animal heads on them like dogs. These are sick people, although I do like their choice in gold. Is this even real? This is ridiculous. This gold is fake. Believe me, I know a lot about gold. I demand to know who is in charge here with your very disgraceful fake gold and dog-headed aliens.
I am the curator of this fine museum, sir.
What are you talking about, museum? This isn't a museum. It's a top secret military outpost that all you illegal aliens are running. I know you told Barack all your secrets. Now I'm the president and you're going to tell me.
Oh, I'm very, very sorry, sir. You are mistaken. This is a marvelous museum in Egypt.
You mean to tell me I'm not in Nevada? I'm in Egypt and all of you aren't illegal aliens? That makes me the illegal alien.
Yes, it appears so, sir. Looks like we need to deport you. We really need to build a big, beautiful wall and make the United States pay for it.
Well, this is the last time I take directions from Sleepy Joe Biden.
The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students. The Committee on Education and Workforce presents Leveling Down. Equity policies create a race to the bottom, undermining excellence and harming students.